I'm 93 years old, and there are 7 things I wish I had never told my family after I turned 70. Not because my children are bad people. They aren't. I love them more than I could ever explain. Clears throat. But I learned something very late in life. Being honest does not always mean telling everyone everything. Sometimes you can tell the truth and still wish you had kept it inside. I know that sounds strange coming from an old man who has spent most of his life believing that families should have no secrets. But at 93, I have lived long enough to understand that some parts of your life are not meant to be handed over to other people, even the people you love most. I've watched relationships change because of a few sentences. I've seen concern turn into control, advice turn into judgment, and love turn into worry. And I have done my share of causing it. So today, sitting here and talking to you the way I would talk to an old friend across the kitchen table, I want to tell you about 7 secrets you should think twice before sharing with your family after 70. I learned these lessons the hard way, and if even one of them saves you from the regret I carried, then telling you was worth it. The first secret is something I wish I had understood much earlier. Don't tell your family exactly how much money you have. I used to believe that being open about finances was responsible. I thought my children were adults and they deserved to know what I had saved, what the house was worth, what was in my accounts, and what their mother and I had put away over the years. I thought I was protecting them. I thought if something happened to me, they would know where everything was. But once people know the exact numbers, something changes. Sometimes it happens without anyone realizing it. A conversation about your house suddenly becomes a conversation about its value. A new purchase suddenly raises a question about whether you really need it. A vacation becomes something they quietly calculate. Even when nobody says anything directly, you can feel that they know. And I learned that your money is not just money when you get older. It represents your independence. It represents decades of work, sacrifice, mistakes, discipline, and choices. I remember telling my son exactly what I had saved. And after that, he started asking more questions about my plans. At first, I thought he was simply being helpful. Then, I realized I had created a situation where he felt entitled to know. I had opened a door that was difficult to close. I'm not telling you to hide everything from your family. If someone needs to know where important documents are, make sure they can find them. If, clears throat, you need help managing your affairs, choose someone you trust and put things in order legally. But there is a difference between making practical arrangements and giving everyone a detailed report of your finances. You can simply say, "I'm comfortable. I've taken care of things." Snorts. That may be enough. At 93, I can tell you this. Peace is worth protecting, and sometimes peace begins with keeping your financial details private. Now, the second secret is one I learned through an experience that still bothers me when I think about it. And that is your opinions about your children's lives. When you have lived for more than 7 decades, you naturally have opinions. You've seen marriages succeed and fail. You've raised children. You've made mistakes. You've watched people lose money, recover from heartbreak, change careers, raise families, and make decisions you never would have made yourself. You may look at your adult children and think, if only they would listen to me. I thought that many times, and I said some of those thoughts out loud. That was my mistake. I once told my daughter that I thought she was being too hard on her own child. I wasn't trying to attack her. I was trying to help. I thought my experience gave me the right to speak. But she didn't hear wisdom. She heard criticism. And before I knew it, we were no longer talking about what was happening that day. We were talking about every mistake I had ever made as a father. Things I had forgotten were suddenly brought back into the room. That was the day I understood something painful. Your children may appreciate your life experience, but they don't necessarily want you directing their lives. They are adults. Their mistakes belong to them. Their clears throat marriages belong to them. Their parenting belongs to them. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children is to let them live their own lives without constantly reminding them how you would do things differently. If they ask for your opinion, give it gently. If they don't ask, sometimes a quiet "I trust you" is worth more than 10 minutes of advice. I used to think silence meant I didn't care. Now I understand that sometimes silence means I care enough not to interfere. And that brings me to the third secret because this one became harder for me as I grew older. Don't tell your family every small detail about your health. I'm not talking about serious medical conditions that require help. If you have a serious illness, need surgery, take important medication, or cannot safely manage something alone, your family may absolutely need to know. I'm talking about every little sign of aging: the stiff knees in the morning, the moment you feel dizzy when you stand, the hand that shakes a little while holding a cup, the night when you wake up 3 times, the fact that you forgot a word for a few seconds, the little things that happen when your body is 70, 80, 90 years old. I used to tell my children about every ache because I thought sharing meant keeping them informed. But after a while I noticed something. They stopped hearing, "I have a sore knee," and started hearing, "Dad is becoming incapable." They started asking whether I was still safe driving, whether I should be living alone, whether I needed someone checking on me every day. Again, they weren't trying to hurt me. They were worried. But worry has a way of becoming control when it grows too large. There is a difference between admitting that your body is changing and announcing that you can no longer manage your life. At my age, I have learned to adapt. I use the railing. I sit down when I need to. I slow down. I ask for help when something truly requires help. But I don't need to turn every little ache into a family meeting. Growing older is not a failure. Your body changing does not automatically mean your independence has disappeared. So be honest with yourself first. Take care of your health. See your doctor when something matters. But you don't have to give your family a running commentary on every pain, every tired morning, or every little accident. Sometimes protecting your privacy also protects the way they see you. And the fourth secret is something I didn't understand until much later. Don't tell your family every detail about your past. We all have a past. Before we became parents, grandparents, husbands, wives, or the person everyone thinks they know, we were young. We made foolish choices. We loved people. We lost people. We made mistakes nobody else remembers. There are chapters of my life that existed long before my children were born. And for many years, I thought telling those stories would bring us closer. One evening, I told my children about someone I had loved when I was young, long before I met their mother. To me, it was simply a story about being young and learning what love really meant. But my children heard something completely different. They started wondering whether I had truly loved their mother. They asked questions I wasn't prepared for. They took one small chapter from my youth and tried to use it to understand an entire marriage that lasted for decades. And I realized that people don't always hear your memories the way you remember them. You may tell a story because it means something to you, but someone else may carry it differently for the rest of their life. That doesn't mean you should be ashamed of your past. You don't have to erase who you were. You simply need to understand that not every memory needs an audience. Some experiences belong to you. Some lessons can stay yours. At 93, I have made peace with many things I did when I was young. And I don't need my children to approve of every chapter of my life. I only need them to know the man I became. And maybe that is one of the quiet privileges of growing old. You finally realize that you don't have to explain every part of yourself anymore. Now, the fifth secret is one that took me many years to understand, and it may be the hardest one to accept because it concerns something we all experience but don't always know how to explain. Your loneliness. When you're young, loneliness often feels temporary. You think it will disappear when you meet the right person, move to a new place, make more friends, or become busy again. But loneliness changes as you grow older. At 93, I have learned that loneliness isn't always sitting alone in a dark room. Sometimes it's sitting in a house full of people and realizing nobody there remembers the world the way you do. Sometimes it's making coffee for two because your hands still remember the old routine, then catching yourself and putting one cup away. Sometimes it's hearing a song from 50 years ago and realizing there is nobody left. You can call who remembers exactly where you were when you first heard it. That kind of loneliness is difficult to explain to someone who hasn't lived long enough to understand it. I used to tell my family whenever I felt lonely. I thought they needed to know, and they tried to help, of course. My children suggested that I move closer to them. They invited me to stay in their homes. They suggested clubs, activities, senior groups, dinners, and all sorts of things. They meant well, but sometimes loneliness isn't a problem you can solve by filling your calendar. I once stayed with my son for several weeks because everyone thought it would be good for me. The house was full, there were voices, children, television, meals, and people coming and going. Yet, I felt more alone there than I did in my quiet home. I was surrounded by their life, but I wasn't really part of it. When I returned home, I realized something important. My solitude belonged to me. I knew its rhythm. I knew the sounds of my own house. I could sit quietly without feeling like I was taking up someone else's space. So, if you're lonely, I'm not telling you to suffer in silence or refuse genuine companionship. Reach out when you need someone. Call an old friend, visit someone, join something if it brings you joy, but don't hand your loneliness entirely over to your children and expect them to fix something they may not understand. You can acknowledge the loneliness without allowing it to become the definition of your life. Sometimes you simply have to learn how to carry it. And that brings me to the sixth secret, which I wish I had understood before I reached this age. Don't tell your family every time you've changed your mind about what you believe. At 20, people expect you to change. At 40, they accept it. But when you're 80 or 90, people sometimes become strangely uncomfortable when you tell them you've changed. They have a picture of you in their minds. They know what you supposedly believe, what you supposedly value, what you supposedly think about the world. And once they have that picture, they may not want to redraw it. I learned this when I changed some of my beliefs later in life. Some of my views about religion changed. Some of my political opinions changed. Some things I once considered extremely important stopped mattering to me at all. Other things I ignored when I was younger became deeply important. That's what happens when you live long enough. You see more. You lose people. You make mistakes. You watch the world change. You discover that something you were absolutely certain about at 50 looks very different at 90. I once mentioned one of these changes to a family member, and instead of hearing "I've grown and learned something," they heard "something is wrong with Dad." They wanted to know why I was different. They wanted an explanation. They treated a change of opinion almost like a warning sign that taught me a valuable lesson. You are still allowed to grow old and become someone slightly different from the person your family remembers. You are allowed to reconsider. You are allowed to read a new book, change your mind, stop attending something you've attended for decades, or discover a completely different way of looking at life. You don't need a committee to approve your evolution. Keep learning, keep thinking, keep questioning, but you don't have to announce every change to the people around you. Sometimes your inner life is your own private garden. You don't have to invite everyone inside just because they are family. And finally, the seventh secret is the one I struggled with the most, and perhaps the one that matters most at my age. Don't tell your family that you're ready for death. Now listen carefully, because I don't mean that you should hide a serious illness or refuse to discuss practical end-of-life arrangements. Those conversations can be important. Your family may need to know your wishes. Your documents should be in order, and the people you trust should understand what you want. I'm talking about something different. I'm talking about the quiet acceptance that sometimes comes with old age. At 93, death doesn't frighten me the way it once did. When I was 40, I thought I had endless time. At 60, I realized time was moving faster. At 80, I started noticing how many people I had known were already gone. And now at 93, I don't think of death as some terrible monster waiting in the darkness. I think of it as the final part of a life I've already been fortunate enough to live. I'm not asking for it. I'm not giving up. I still enjoy my morning coffee. I still laugh at stupid things. I still enjoy a good meal and a beautiful day. But I am no longer desperate to hold on to every second. And when I once tried to explain that feeling to my family, they didn't understand. They heard, "Dad doesn't want to live anymore." That's not what I meant. I meant I've lived, I've loved, I've lost. I've had my share of beautiful days, and when my final day comes, I don't want you to be afraid for me. But children don't always hear that. To them, your death means their loss. They hear the end of your life while you're thinking about the whole life that came before it. So, I learned to be careful with those words. Make your practical wishes known. Put your affairs in order. Tell the people you love that you love them. But you don't have to repeatedly describe your acceptance of death to people who aren't ready to hear it. Sometimes that peace is something you carry privately. At 93, when I look back, I don't regret loving my family. I regret believing that love meant telling them everything. It doesn't. You can love your family deeply and still keep parts of your life private. You can accept their choices without approving every one of them. And you can let them help you without giving up your independence. So if you remember one thing from me today, let it be this. Choose your silence wisely. Not every truth needs to be spoken. Some truths are better carried quietly, not because you're dishonest, but because you're protecting your peace. Thank you for spending these minutes with me. At my age, I don't take your time or your attention for granted. Take care of yourself, protect your peace, and keep the people you love close. But don't forget to keep a little piece of your life just for yourself. Until we meet again, stay strong, stay peaceful, and take care. Goodbye, my friend.